Hi everyone, Simone here, coming to you on this blessed Saturday. Unfortunately, I can't say that it's a happy day because, as you know, many of our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent are experiencing the eruption of the La Soufriere volcano in St. Vincent. So we wanted to come on today. We have with us geologist Mr. Lennon Matthew, and he has agreed to come on to share some information on the volcano, what's going on in St. Vincent, and also to just give us some information because I'm sure a lot of us are concerned about the implications for the other Caribbean islands. So we wanted to come on and share some information with you, share a layman's perspective with you on everything that is going on in St. Vincent, everything that is going on in the region. And I so want to thank everyone who shared the flyer that I posted only yesterday. So over 50 people shared the flyer that we would be here this evening talking about the St. Vincent volcano. So I want to thank you for doing so, for sharing this critical information. And also I want to thank those of you who will share this presentation as well, so that we can all be better informed about what is going on in St. Vincent. So come on in, everyone, come on in. As you do, please let me know if you can hear me loud and clear, or if I need to put back my headset on so you can hear me even better. And don't forget to share this video, tag someone, as we're all concerned. And we are looking forward to having this conversation about your concerns and having this conversation about what the people of St. Vincent are experiencing. So again, come on in as we welcome our guest to the program, Mr. Lennon Matthew, and he's with us right now. So Lennon, how are you?
Fine, and you? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I wanted to say very special thank you to you for agreeing in quick time. I only reached out to you yesterday, and you agreed to be on the program. And while we're at it, I wanted to thank Mr. Matthias Peltier, Matt Peltier, on Q95 for responding very quickly when I asked him to share your contact information. So it's wonderful having you on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, and just kind of tell us who you are, what a geologist is, where in Dominica you're from, and everything we might need to know about you.
All right. So the name is Lennon Matthew. I am born and raised in Dominica from the village of Benz. Grew up there all my life. Prior to moving to the United States, I studied geography at the Sixth Form College in 96 to 98, and then did 2 years as a geography teacher in the Portsmouth Secondary School. And then in 2000, I migrated to the US and to pursue a degree in geology. And since then, I have been working as an environmental geologist. I worked in Florida for 10 years and worked in Dallas, Texas for the last 6 years. What drove me into geology? It's growing up in Dominica. We're surrounded by mountains. We are tiny islands and surrounded by mountains. And I always had a keen interest in social studies and science. From a little kid, I was fascinated with maps and the globe and all that good stuff. For some reason, it looked like fun. I remember when my older sister, Lindona, went to high school, she brought home this atlas. And I would spend weeks and weeks going through there and just loving the maps and looking at the different places and the different features. Little did I know that's where I would have ended up in my future. But a geologist is not just about rocks. So there are several, like in the field of medicine, you have a general practitioner who's a doctor, but there are several specialities. Geology is kind of the same thing. So I studied general geology, but in geology there are different topics like sedimentology, volcanology, stratigraphy, there paleontology, and all this has to do with very old, I should say, old materials. One thing about geologists, they are like storytellers. They are like historians. They are like storytellers of the earth. Whereas a historian, as we know, tells a story of human civilization and things that are, I would say, recent, probably 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years. geology studies and tells the story of a much longer period of time. And how we do that, and one of the rules in geology is looking at the current processes that affect Earth, the physical processes. We're talking about hurricanes, we're talking about earthquakes, we talk about volcanoes, we talk about landslides, and understanding that these processes happened a long time ago. And then when you look at the different mountains and the different rocks and the different fossils and where they are formed, understanding where these rocks were formed, understand how they are formed, understanding where they are found, it tells a lot. For example, coral reefs are formed in warm tropical regions, and limestone. So if you go to England and you see a limestone formation, it tells you that at one point it must have been in a warm tropical area. And that's how you kind of decipher things. Then if you go to a mountain at 8,000 feet and you look in through a rock formation and there is shark tooth and scales, you want to ask yourself a question: how did that shark tooth and scale get at 8,000 feet in a mountain in Colorado? So it had to have a story. So that is what happens when geologists go out. They look for the writing in the rocks, the writing in the mountains, the writing in the volcanoes, and they are able to tell the story of the Earth. And through that kind of detective work, that kind of historical work, that kind of deciphering, looking at the current processes and understanding in what environment they are formed, then you can translate that to 10 million years ago, 30 million years ago. And then there are other techniques like radiometric dating and carbon dating and all other stuff that are used in determining age. And not just those, but you have to look at, there's a bunch of stuff like tree ring dating and all that stuff, and make the correlation between, those different observations, and then you can deduct time. So it's a pretty interesting field in geology. There are folks who deal with landslides. There are folks who deal with structure, soil structure, soil integrity, hazards, hurricanes, earthquakes. These things still happen. So it's a broad field, and there's so many different disciplines in geology you can get involved in.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Lennon. Thank you for sharing what exactly geologists do and what it is. And it's truly a fascinating field. Now, even before we get started, because we have so much to cover and we have quite a few people on the live, I want to make sure that we're engaging the audience. And I ask that you keep your questions maybe towards the latter part of the presentation so we can get to them. But even before we get started, we have quite a few people who are not from the Caribbean. So what I want to do before we get started is kind of take a look first at what is going on in St. Vincent, because even as of today, the volcano was still erupting. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and have us take a look at what exactly is going on in St. Vincent. So just give me 1 minute while I pull this up so we can all take a look. And let me know if you can hear it loud and clear.
A second volcanic eruption. People evacuated from the area, and cruise ships are now responding to the calls for help. ABC's Julia McFarland has the story.
Overnight, dramatic images from the island of St. Vincent. The Caribbean nation's disaster management agency confirming a second explosive eruption. The long dormant volcano awakening, blasting giant clouds of ash into the sky. Officials saying plumes are rising above 25,000 feet. Homes covered in ash as thousands of people are forced to evacuate.
I hear this loud explosion. I hear this smoke start to go up in the air. So, I just get panic and just, just tell my brother, there we go.
But the eruptions are complicating the evacuation process. This ferry unable to get into the evacuation zone due to low visibility.
Yeah, the ash is falling. Can't see anything.
The ashfall itself, if it gets wet, it forms like a cement type of texture and materials.
The volcano, known as La Soufrière, has been quiet for decades, but began showing signs of activity just a few months ago. Then, on Friday, an early morning eruption, followed by a second just hours later.
There'll be periods of pauses in between where nothing might happen, but the entire length of the eruption could last weeks to months.
Well, the U.S. State Department says it's not aware of any threat to U.S. citizens on St. Vincent. Meanwhile, there is now a race against time to get everyone there out of harm's way before it rains, potentially turning all that hot ash into rock. guys?
Yeah, so that was just a brief news clip on what is going on in St. Vincent. And then for those of us who are not from the Caribbean, because we have quite a few followers who are not from the Caribbean, I also wanted to share with you the area that we are talking about. So this is the chain of islands of the Caribbean. And of course, up in the left-hand corner would be North America, and then at the bottom would be South America. So the chain of islands, of course, you see the U.S. British Virgin Islands.
Can see.
Is it not showing? Oh, I think you have to come out and go back in. That's the one thing about StreamYard. You have to stop sharing and then you have to start sharing again. So let's try that again. Okay, so let's go to the map and let me know if you can hear it. So thank you for letting me know that you could not see it. Can you see it now? Yeah,
Yep.
Lennon, you can see it?
Yes, it's
Okay,
yes,
perfect. So I just wanted to show those of us who are not from the islands, I wanted to show you a map of what the island area looks like. So of course you see in the top the U.S. British Virgin Islands, then you come down Antigua, Guadeloupe, Montserrat, Dominica. So if you take a look all the way down here, you see St. Vincent. So just kind of giving you an idea of what the area looks like that we are referring to. So Lennon, so back to you. So we know that the volcano is erupting right now. So what should we know? Is there a certain time period that volcanoes normally erupt for? Is there a certain time period? Can they expect that to go on for days on end?
That is where uncertainty is. I don't think there is enough scientific technology to determine that stuff. It's one of those things in nature. You just wait and see what happens and how long it goes. If there are instruments, they probably are, but I don't think there is any way of knowing how long it's going to happen. There are signs and indications. And before we get further, I just want, like I mentioned to you, I just want to remind your listeners that it's very important to listen to the experts on that. I'm a geologist. I'm nowhere an expert in volcanology because that's a branch of volcanology, but have enough, basic knowledge to have a conversation. But I would like to say my hat out to the folks of St. Vincent going through that stuff. And one thing I'd like to mention is from the observation, I would like to say a big congratulations to Dr. Richard Robertson and his UWI Seismics Research Center. I think they did a very awesome job in terms of monitoring the volcano and giving the advance warning, because in the past, we've always learned that there are two natural disasters that are very hard to predict, and that is earthquakes and volcanoes. And earthquakes cannot happen suddenly. Volcanoes cannot give signals and indications. But through the years of having these activities, there were certain signals that they observed that happened right before a volcanic eruption. And that's the frequency of volcanoes. And I remember hearing Dr. Richard Robertson talk about that. And I would really like to point that out, because in the past, what we have seen, for example, in 1995, when the Montserrat volcano erupted, which is a British territory, we had people from outside coming to give us data. With the assistance of folks in the Caribbean. But it was really pleasing to see that we had somebody from the University of the West Indies, a Caribbean person, a black man, with that level of confidence and that level of education, giving us the right information. And I want to say an outstanding job that they have done. And I think most people in the Caribbean can take comfort in knowing that we have capable, competent people who can do these kind of things given the right environment and right resources. So I just wanted to make that clear and point that out. But back to your question, it's kind of difficult to tell how long it's going to last. It's just a matter of monitoring, checking the signs, looking for the signals, and then making the right decision so you can help save life and property. That's what it is.
Yes, and as we can see, about 20,000 people in the area had to be evacuated, and there's only room for about 12,000 in the shelters in St. Vincent. So truly very concerning. And it's just wonderful to see Caribbean unity on complete display when you hear that the islands are willing to take in a lot of the evacuees to keep them safe while all of this is going on. And of course, I'm sure everyone has a concern about the fact that these people are going to need to be in quarantine or vaccinated. So we will get to that topic in a little bit. Now, let me just ask you this. And of course, I know you're not a volcanologist, but just in general terms, usually if a volcano is active, is it inevitable that it will erupt, or do some become active and then go back to being dormant? And then once we've talked about that question, I want to look at this fantastic imagery that you sent us in terms of the volcanoes on the different islands.
Yeah. So there are different types of eruptions, and there's one eruption, especially in the Caribbean, they call composite volcanoes. That is because they have periods where they have ash eruption, like what you're seeing right now, and then they have periods where they have a lava eruption or effusive eruption, and Dr. Robertson mentioned that. The effusive eruption is not as violent, it's just spewing out lava, and sometimes it builds a dome and it grows to the point, and it can spread over an area. In this explosive eruption, it's mainly as a result of the location of the volcano at a subduction zone in the Caribbean. And during that subduction, you have water and all water from the ocean getting into the upper parts of the mantle, and to give you an understanding of what it is. Most people have boiled oats or cream of wheat. It's viscous, it's thick. There's water in there. You see when you start boiling and it gets to that point where it's really thick, you see those little bubbles coming up from the surface, and it's kind of explosive. Well, that's kind of what's happening in that area. You have the subduction, you have a lot of water, seawater, and all that getting into the magma chamber. That air expands, and it's going to find a way to get out because it builds pressure over time. And when it does that, you have those explosive eruptions. In places like Hawaii and in the Iceland, where you have eruptions from seafloor spreading, which is where you have fissures in the earth because of the dynamics happening in the mantle, you have seafloor spreading, you have magma coming up at a much slower pace, and they build large platforms like in Hawaii, in Iceland, and some of these areas. So you have this kind of volcano. So it just depends on the location, the material below, what's happening in the mantle. In the Caribbean is distinct. I just got to remind people that we love the mountains, we love the sulfur springs, we love the rivers, we love our terrain. But what built the Caribbean millions of years ago is actually that phenomenon called plate tectonics, where you have the Atlantic plate and the Caribbean plate meeting. And as a result, it created the chain of islands and the volcanoes. So what makes our island beautiful is actually what is we're seeing right now. And the processes that form the Caribbean never really stopped. Even if we did in geography, mountain building happened millions of years ago. That process has never stopped. Every time we hear about earthquakes in the Caribbean, and we hear about tremors, like the one that happened in Haiti in 2010, I think, killed 250,000 people. We had a couple of them in Puerto Rico recently, and people, panicked. We saw examples in Jamaica. We saw examples in Trinidad. And if you notice where they're happening at the contact of the plate, because between Trinidad and the South of America, that's where the southern part of the Caribbean plate meets the South American plate. When you get to Puerto Rico, that's where the North American plate and the Caribbean plate slide past each other. Now, where Dominica and the rest of the volcanic islands are located is in the front of the Caribbean plate. So you have the two plates meeting. There's a zone, there's a subduction. So you have one plate, there's a subduction. There's a subduction, and that gets into the mantle, and then you have landform buckling up. So you have uplifts and upward movement, and within all that pressure building there, you have fractures and fissures that cause those volcanoes. The process has never stopped. Like I said earlier, when you talk about geology, the difference is time when it comes to the history of the earth. We're not talking about 50 years, 100 years. We're talking about millions and thousands of years. The plates, by the way, are moving at 3 to 4 centimeters a year. That's measurable. So if you project that 10 million years or 20 million years down the road, you probably can have an idea of what the Caribbean will look like. These are the kind of things we do. So the processes have never stopped. That's what built the Caribbean. The problem is the islands are pretty small. And like every natural disaster, what happens? It causes displacement. If you have people living in an area where you have a volcano, every 40 years, every 50 years, every 100 years. For example, Montserrat was considered a dormant volcano and had not have any activity for over 300 years, hundreds of years. And then suddenly in 1995, guess what happened? The tongue of Plymouth was changed over a period of time. St. Vincent is an interesting case because when I looked up at the volcanic history in there, they had one in the 1700s, I think in 1718. There was another one in 1812. Then there was one in 1902, and then there was one in 1979. And 42 years later, there's another activity. So there seems to be, it seems like there's a cycle. But as I said, the processes never stop. And if you look at how long, when we talk about millions of years, if you look at within the past 200 years, we've had in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and two in the 1900s and one in the 20th. So that's like about 4 or 5 of them. If you project that to 20 million years later, you can determine how many volcanoes St. Vincent might have within that time until that volcano goes dormant. So it's something that's going to happen. Where it becomes a problem is because the islands are so small. There's not much place you can go to. These powerful forces, it's nature. There are not many places to go to. And what you see in like every disaster, the biggest problem in the disaster is the displacement of human beings. So you get comfortable living in a place, you got property, you got your house, you've worked so hard to develop your resources, and then nature takes place and you have to leave all that stuff behind. And at the end of the day, you can't even go back, and then you have to start again. I think that's what's difficult about it. I think it teaches us a lesson in the Caribbean. I don't think the disaster response for volcanoes in the Caribbean should be an individual island response, because what we see happening now is because of the displacement of people, because of how small the islands are, we're going to need the other islands to harbor and shelter people. That's going to add to the population. It's going to add to requiring services. You're going to have kids that may need to go to school. So in the planning of those kind of disasters, it should be a regional effort and not an individual island effort. As you've seen what's happening right now, it's not only affecting St. Vincent, it's going to affect the other Caribbean islands because these people have to find a place to go. And I think that's some of the lessons we have to learn from what's happening right now.
Yes, and I'm really happy that you're sharing this information with us. But what I want to take a look at, I want to show what you were just referencing in terms of the history of volcanoes in the Caribbean region. So UWI does a great job of providing resources.
Yeah, they do.
And I highly recommend this page. I actually have it listed in the link that I posted in the video. So of course you can take a look and see the information. Unfortunately, they don't have Dominica listed there. So I was a bit disappointed with that information, but this is what I think I'm looking for. Let's take a look here. So it sort of outlines, I think this is so important to have. And tell me if you can see it, Lennon.
Yeah, I can see some of it. Yeah.
Perfect. So it tells you, this is the area I want us to look at. It tells you actual volcanic disasters in the Eastern Caribbean over the past 300 years. So this is a very important resource because, as you very adequately said, that St. Vincent volcano erupted in 1718, 1812, 1902, and of course now. And of course, many people remember the Mont Pelée eruption in Martinique in 1902, and then Soufrière in Guadeloupe, and again Soufrière St. Vincent. So and then Montserrat in 1995, which we're all familiar with. But that begs the question, though, Lennon, why is it that the people of St. Vincent have been allowed to live in that area? If that same volcano keeps erupting, why would it not be mandatory that people not be allowed to live in that area? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a really difficult question to answer because, like I said, the intervals for earthquake for volcanoes, it's a long period of time. I mean, 42
Mm-hmm.
years. You're talking about 18 to 8. That's 100 years, and in 100
Yes.
years, people tend to forget that. I think that's the biggest deal. People tend to forget that where we live, it's a volcanic region. It's probably
Mm-hmm.
one of the highest concentration of volcanoes in the world. It's actually considered a hotspot that scientists have been observing for years because there had not been major activity. Take, for example, Dominica. I could say the same thing about Dominica because where Rosso is located has about 4 volcanoes, active volcanoes surrounding Rosso. And one of the reasons Dominica is probably not on there, it's because for volcanoes, it's because we have not had a major eruption in in a long time. I mean, before recorded,
Well, over 300 years, but that begs the question: should we be breathing a sigh of relief that Dominica is not on there, or should we still be prepared?
Well, my perspective on that is I think in every settlement, in everywhere you live, the biggest take about it is understanding the hazards that surround you. No matter where you live, for example, I'm in Texas and we have tornadoes. You go to other areas like California. California is a major metropolitan area, metroplex. But guess what? There is a fault that runs along California, and geologists said that at some point it's going to sink so bad that it might split up. But guess what? There are people living in there, and they had earthquakes. They had earthquake that damaged in 1980 something, and a few years there were earthquakes that were pretty damaging, and they're expecting a big one, but people still live there. And one of the things with the earthquake area, the volcano areas in the Caribbean, volcanic ash produces fertile land, and
Mm-hmm.
our region had been an agrarian society, so the best land for planting and cultivating crops are normally at the foothills of the volcano. And if you take a Google Earth view of Saint Vincent, you will notice, I should say, St. Vincent is smaller than Dominica, but has St. Vincent the Grenadines have a population of about 110, over 100,000 people. Most of the folks in St. Vincent live in the south of the mountain of that volcano region. And if you take a Google Earth look at St. Vincent, you will see a lot of evidence of agriculture and cultivation around the foothills of the mountains. And there are small residents to the north and to the east of that volcanic mountain. It's not huge. So it tells me that, the larger concentration of people live in the south. So they are aware of the hazards. It tells me they are aware of the hazards. But people have land and people have business and develop life, and over 100 years in our lifetime we probably wouldn't see it. So it's kind of difficult. Just like I can tell people in Trafalgar who live basically in a volcanic vent area, you can tell the people of Trafalgar why you're living there, but they've been living there for 100 years. Nothing ever happened. But as I said before, we live in a region, and there are hazards, and we have to expect at any time that this thing's going to happen. And I don't think it's going to stop, but it's kind of difficult to tell people once they're used to their livelihoods where to live and where not to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And of course, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with geologist Mr. Lennon Matthew, originally from Dominica, but he now resides in Texas. And he's just sharing his insights on the eruption of the volcano in St. Vincent and all the implications that come with that. Now, Lennon, you also did a wonderful thing of sharing with us some of the volcanoes in the region. So I would like to take a look at that right now. So I guess you can go ahead and keep talking while I pull that up, because I want us to take a look at the volcanoes by the different islands that you share. Now tell me if you can see this.
Yeah, I can see it's not open
Good.
yet. But,
so we can see Saba, St. Eustatia, St. Kitts, Nevis. Oh my Lord! Lennon, you sent me this and I got nervous because I looked at Dominica, and how many are there?
9. You may have to open it a little bit. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'll zoom.
I can see the file, but I can't see it opened up.
Okay. Let's see if I can zoom a little bit. Can you see now?
Not yet. We have to get
that's
out.
interesting.
We have to get out and get.
Yeah, let me get out and try that again. But in the meantime, I think we saw about 9 volcanoes represented
in
Dominica.
So when as I said, when you look at active volcanoes in the Caribbean, so of the main 13 active volcanoes in the Caribbean, Dominica we're lucky, we have 9.
Wow.
So Dominicans can be really thankful that we haven't seen any major eruption. And it's so interesting. I'll tell you what I found out. So if you go in Dominica, you go to the north of the island, there is Mount Wat, I think, near Penville area. I've walked through that area and you can smell the sulfur there. Sulfur springs in there. I can't remember if it's a cool or a hot sulfur spring. But I'll tell you something that's pretty interesting. If you go to Granville in Portsmouth, there are areas where there are hot rocks that are pretty close to the surface, and at the mouth of it's not the Indian River, at the mouth of the river next to Longhouse, there is actually a location in the water there where the river and the sea meet that gets so hot that if you can't even touch it, and a lot of people are not even aware that there are hot spots. There are hot spots right where they pass all the time. So these features are there, the sulfur springs and all that stuff. So there are lots of features that are exposed in Dominica. We have, as I said, 9 of the active volcanoes in the island. We have 9 of the highest concentration. As I said earlier, no matter where you live, there are hazards. We are lucky we have not had major eruptions in a long time. It's not a matter of if it will happen, it's a matter of when it will happen. And what we do is we learn from the experiences of the other islands. We had, for example, in 1995, in the Montserrat eruption, there were lessons to be learned. We saw the ashfall. We saw the main thing that happened with disaster, as I said, is the relocation and movement of people. You have to move people out of the region, out of the area, and they can't go back because volcanoes transform the land. Volcanoes is what creates the land. Volcanoes is what creates the mountains. Volcanoes is what extend the land. And if I take a Google Earth view of Dominica, I can see a lot of areas that have very distinct volcanic features. For example, Grand Savant Salisbury. When you look at Grand Savant Salisbury is an old lava flow. And if you know what you're looking for, you can see it. Just take a look at Grand Savant Salisbury when you get a chance on Google Earth, and then go look at the features formed by the volcanoes in Montserrat, and you can tell what it is. When you look to the south of the island, you can see a lot of old volcanic features. Even the tongue of Roseau is an old pyroclastic flow area. I mean, these features are there. The volcanic features are there. I don't need to say about Soufriere because everybody know the hot springs we go bathing and all that good stuff. But I think what is interesting is once you understand the hazards that you live around, it's up to the people in charge, the policymakers, to understand and don't take these things for granted and put systems in place, because we've seen it in Montserrat. Plymouth is now non-existent. Most people had to move to the north to get away from the volcano. What we're seeing in St. Vincent, if it continues for a long time, the landform can be transformed so drastically that people can't even tell where their land or their house is. Well, hopefully it doesn't last that long. We just hope it probably lasts, the next few days. But if it lasts for a very long time, it has the potential to add to the land and transform the land. That's what happens in the Caribbean growth. That's what built Dominica. That's what built all the other islands. It's the volcanic activity over millions of years. So I think what we should do as people who are seeing what happening now, and one thing I must add, in the past, when people studied geology and volcanoes, we look for the evidence. What is cool about today is you actually getting all these live footages. I can imagine Dr. Robertson and his guys are probably collecting samples of the material, testing their chemical constituents, taking measurements, doing surveys, because what all this eruption is giving us is data to understand the process. And every time a volcano erupts, the very, very bright people, the experts, get the data they need, the information they need, so that they can better prepare for the next one. As I said, because the eruptions are so far apart, people tend to get complacent. So what I would have advised is, knowing the hazards that exist in Dominica, knowing the major hazards, we should at least secure a location in Dominica that has the less risk and designate it a future resident location. Just keep it as it is. Make sure that you can run water and lights and something, just in case something like that happens in Dominica, not just Dominica, but another Caribbean island where people can go back. What if people can go back to St. Vincent, to their location? What if people can go back in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years? I heard they were looking at five months. But who knows if that volcano goes on for a long time and they can't go back to their land? You can, I mean, St. Vincent is small; it can't hold all that people. So I think that's why I said earlier that has to be a Caribbean effort. I think the individual approach in disaster management in the Caribbean needs to change. And you know, because we see what happening. Folks are going to have to come to Dominica. So if things change for the long term, if you have a particular location in Dominica that's low risk, you can develop into a future settlement, then we can go ahead and do the necessary work, clearing the land and setting up communities, putting the roads and whatever. So just in case something like that happens, then you have places you can move people to. And I think that's just smart preparation for understanding the hazards where you are and preparing for that possibility.
Yeah, and of course, our heart goes out to the people of St. Vincent because I think the anxiety comes in with just not knowing how long this is all going to happen and how long you're going to be displaced for, and where do you go when your property and your livelihood is completely destroyed? Do you stay in the island where you've been relocated to? Do you go back to St. Vincent? Where in St. Vincent are you going to be relocated for? But in speaking with you prior to our Facebook Live today, you also mentioned that as far as you were aware, the last time we had volcano preparation in Dominica drill was back in 1999. So let's just talk about the importance of doing those drills, of ensuring we know how to move, because we saw the chaos. You know, I think what happened is it started off orderly in St. Vincent, but then it broke down into chaos because people were panicked when they saw that the volcano kept erupting. So let's just spend a minute or two talking about the importance of disaster preparedness. You know, we talk a lot about hurricanes, but we almost never hear about disaster preparedness for volcanoes.
Yeah, and that is one of the trickiest situations with volcanoes and the response to volcanoes. And earlier I said in the past it had been very difficult to predict, and that is why I wanted to give a big shout out and kudos to Dr. Robertson, because he had mentioned of the low vibrations, and what scientists had observed is right before a volcano is about to erupt, there's a frequency of low level rumbling that happen. And they can record that stuff. And because these things happened in the past, they were able to give information. Now, what I noticed happened is he was paying attention to this rumbling, and he came out and he said that the volcano had been speaking differently, for lack of a better term. and that's where I think the excellence and you could tell the improvement in detecting those volcanoes. What I think they need to review what happened, and after every situation like that, it always serves as a learning experience. You see what you did great, you see where you could improve, and you make the adjustment. And what I observed is when he made those observations, it was earlier in the day, and he said, you know, we are getting some low-level rumblings, the volcano is talking to us in a different manner. We got to pay attention because that's a sign that something may happen shortly. There was an evacuation order that was done at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the tricky part about it is, and that's where the policymakers, you know, it's kind of hard to tell, because you don't want to tell people, okay, we're going to have evacuate, and 2 weeks later, the volcano hasn't erupted. And that was the problem they had in the past, is trying to make sure that you don't displace people and nothing happens. But in that time, they get it right. And I really had to point that out, because I think that's something you got to pay attention to. And to me, that's a gold star for these guys at the US Seismic Research Center. But the lessons they could have learned from that is, one, probably they should have evacuated people earlier in the day. And the reason why you do that is because it's easier to evacuate people when it's daylight. And you can get all the people out and do the sweep, or at least evacuate the folks a day before. Once you get this rumbling, the thing about it is, I'm not sure how long that rumbling starts from the time that signature that the volcano is going to erupt to the time it erupts. I'm not sure how long that period is, but if it started a day before and the scientists are sure, hey, that's the indicator that stuff is going to erupt, then you try to do it as early as possible where it doesn't inconvenience people, because there is the crying wolf syndrome in human beings, that if you say it's going to erupt and it doesn't erupt, then the next time you tell people stuff, they're just going to stay there and do nothing, and that's what we try to avoid. So I think what they should have done is probably evacuate the people earlier, so it wouldn't have been chaotic. Now, when you evacuate in the night, you add in another layer of difficulty to it, because it's in darkness. You got to get boats, you got to get people out, and then people start panicking. And when people start panicking in the night, bad things can happen. So you try to get it done earlier in the morning, earlier in the day, or at least a day before, so you can give yourself enough time to go back in the villages and try to convince people to get out and do what's necessary. But that's the tricky part. It's really difficult on the scientists. I understand, they're trying to give as accurate information as possible, but people have to understand it's not easy. It's not easy to tell people to move up, get up and go. And I think as long as we understand the process it takes, and in that process of evacuation, they save lives, because the last volcanic eruption in 1902 killed 1,600 people. So in that case, I have not heard any deaths. So I think that's kudos to the UE seismic research people on there. So that's the lesson we learn. And I think what we look at is things change. And then to go back to your question, so I heard that the last simulation exercise in Dominica was in 2009. In my opinion, I think there should be at least 5-10 years, there should be drills, even if not major drills, but, you can do virtual drills or, some form of reminding people. Because within a 10-year or 20-year period, things change. You got to think of, am I roadways large enough to accommodate the population change? If you look at Dominica, let's take, for example, Dominica. We have so many vehicles that have come into Dominica in the past 20 years since I was home, that a little accident is causing a traffic jam all the way back to Maho Massa. You understand what I'm saying? So if we have such a large increase in motorized vehicle, if we're going to do a drill or do something, you're going to have traffic jam. How are you going to account for that if you don't have a drill? And what the drill does is to catch errors, to catch ways you can improve. Hey, what are the problems we're going to encounter? So you need to have this thing on a basis that makes sense. 20 years, I think, is too long, because if I was 15 years, 20 years ago, I'm a grown man ready to retire. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to have those drills so that people don't get complacent. And you have to look at, hey, do we have WAFs? Do we have boats in Dominica? I know we don't have any ferries in Dominica except Val Ferry. How fast can I get them there? Did we, in the last 10 years, have change in infrastructure? Did we change our roadways? Did we have more settlements? Did we have an increase in population? Did we have unusual circumstances? Our drainage patterns change. We had Tropical Storm Erika and Tropical Storm Maria. Did it change our drainage patterns, that the bridge that existed there before is no longer there? We have to look at these things, because things change over a period of time. And if it changes over a period of time, you have to accommodate those changes in your simulation exercises, so you are prepared in the case of an emergency. You can relocate people. So I think there should be drills done at least 5 to 10 years, somewhere about. It just depends. As I said, those things don't happen often enough. But if there's any time to think about it, is now. It may not happen in our lifetime, but the fact is, you being prepared for it. We pass that information. The cool thing about what's happening now, because it's so live, everybody's documenting what is happening right now. And I think a lot of scientists are going to look at all the social media videos, all the effects of the ash, all the after effects of the volcanoes. We had experiences in 95 in Montserrat. Some of those lessons learned, we can move. As a matter of fact, I was looking at a video day before yesterday, just looking at the Montserrat volcano. And one of the things I learned was, because a lot of people moved to shelters and were in shelters for a long time, they had a rise in teenage pregnancy. Who would even think about that?
Who thought about that?
There was a rise in molestation, because you have a whole bunch of people living in there without proper housing. Not proper housing, because you have, basically, it's like you move people into a large area, they don't have place to stay, and there's no privacy. I never even thought about that. So when you learn those lessons,
Yeah, yeah.
you can apply it to the situation now and see what happens and make the necessary adjustments. So it's not just about the scientists and the volcanologists, it's a society in a whole. The nurses, as a matter of fact, one of the issues they had in Montserrat, a lot of nurses left. And they had nurses from St. Lucia and other places like Dominica to come and help with the situation. So you have to think of all your human resources. If you have people living in these areas, a lot of your human resources, they don't have homes, they're going to leave. And how are you going to treat people who stayed back? And all these things you got to think of. So in an assimilation exercise, when it's done, it tells you that there is a society that's thinking for the long-term future. If we just live day to day, not understanding the hazards that we live in, for hurricanes, we are probably experts because we get hurricanes every year and we have to sort of prepare, although some people don't even prepare for it. I can remember before Erica, I think we just lost track there for a little bit, although we get hurricanes every year. So imagine if you get in a volcano every 26 years, every 42 years. I guarantee you by next 15 years, by next 6 years, everybody's going to forget about St. Vincent until something else pops up. Like it's new.
Well, hopefully it's a lesson learned that we need to be prepared. And we have some wonderful questions and comments coming in on the live. And we have Leslie Charles who asks, please ask Lennon Matthew, what fuels a volcano? Do you have any insight on that? What fuels the volcano?
well, let me see if I can give you a justification to that answer. So like I said earlier, there are different types of volcanoes based on where they are and the material they overlay. In our case in the Caribbean, it's driven by the plate tectonics, where, as I said, where the Caribbean and the Caribbean plate and the Atlantic plate converges. And during that subduction, you have seawater, you have all that stuff getting down into the mantle. It's a slow process. It's, like I said, 2 to 3 centimeters a year. So it tells you it's moving, there is movement, there is all this movement happening on the plate boundaries in the case in the Caribbean. So over a period of time, it's almost like you have a kettle. You have a kettle boiling water. It takes a little while. It just depends on how long that pressure takes to build up, how the plates are moving, how the fractures or the weaknesses are exposed. And when that happens and that pressure is large enough, then you have the extrusion of magma, either effusively or slow magma movement, or explosive magma movement based on the pressure in there. In the other volcanoes, it's because of that seafloor spreading, and there's a whole bunch of dynamics and convection and physics and all kind of stuff going on inside the Earth. I think the Earth is a living body. You have so much heat down there. You're talking about thousands of degrees centigrade. You're talking about the movement of the heat circulation within the mantle that causes that seafloor spreading. And when some of those rocks on the split boundaries get so heavy, they subduct. And during that subduction, you have, as I said, water and all the air and all that stuff getting down in there. And that's what causes the volcanoes to occur. And then I know some people were asking earlier, are the volcanoes linked? And I think if you look at one of the statistics you showed, in 1902, the volcano that erupted in St. Vincent occurred a day after Mount Pelée eruption. And some people may think it's linked. So I try to let people understand. So if you in your community and you have a reservoir with pipes running to every household, that's a linked system. That's where you have pipes running to the system. They're all connected to the same reservoir, and these pipes are interconnected. So you have a linked system. So pressure in one pipe might affect pressure in another pipe. Volcanoes are not linked. In the Caribbean, it's not linked that way. So a volcanic eruption in St. Vincent doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have. It's not gonna cause an eruption in Dominica. That's not what causes it. The one in Mount Pelée, my guess, it might have been based on the movement of the plates, based on where the pressure was, and it may happen at that time that these two weaknesses in the crust had a pressure build up over a period of time. So as I said, 2 to 3 centimeters a year, they don't all move the same rate. You may have what they call a juxtaposition. You know, if you have, let's say, a rugby team or a football team and they're pushing on one another, some guys are stronger than the others. So somebody might be pushed back further than the other. And that's kind of what's happening. It's the same dynamic. And when that pressure builds up over a period of time. So what I've been observing is for the past few years, we've been hearing a lot of rumblings and earthquakes in the Caribbean. We heard out of Antigua. That's the plates moving. That's the Caribbean that's been forming for millions of years, and that stuff is never going to stop. So every time the pressure builds up over a period of time, you're going to have volcanic activity. We've had volcanic, as a matter of fact, Mount Etna, which is in Sicily, has been going off on March 16. And Iceland has a volcano that's been spewing. Now, the interesting thing about the volcano is Iceland. So there's what they call the mid-oceanic ridge that stretches in the center of the Atlantic Ocean. And if you look at Google Earth, I love Google Earth. Google Earth is the best thing since sliced bread. But if you check Google Earth and you look in the Caribbean Ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, you can see where the mid-oceanic ridge is, and Iceland is where the mid-oceanic ridge surfaces, gets above sea level. That's an interesting stuff. So what you see happening there is a different volcanic activity. That magma based on convection currents in the mantle causes the seafloor to spread, and there is some other activity that happens on the ends of the plate that is so dense and it's so heavy it tends to drag down the plates. So that causes that seafloor spreading. You have hot molten mantle material coming up to the surface and forming places like island and spreading the seafloor. So it depends on where the volcanoes are. It's basically the subduction zone and the inclusion of a lot of seawater into the mantle, as a matter of fact, that causes that buildup and that pressure. So what is so neat about all this stuff? The physics, the chemistry, the all that science involved, we see it every day. I mean, like I used to when I taught geography in high school, I used to tell the kids about what's happening right now, and I said some of these processes in our daily lives, we see them. I mean, if you take an electric kettle and you start boiling it, it starts heating up at the bottom, and you see a circular motion in there. Well, guess what? That same sort of stuff happened in the earth. It's heat. It behaves the same way, and if it behaved differently, then that would be pretty interesting. So the forces of nature we see kind of behave the same way on a micro scale in your boiling pot and on a gigantic scale in the Earth's mantle, because matter has similar properties, just expanding. So what you have happening is you have that subduction, you have that feeding at the subduction zone, it gets hot, you have expansion of your gases, it forces magma up, and over a period of time you have that magma being forced out through the weaknesses we have in the volcanic areas, and those weaknesses are Soufriere Hills in Dominica, Soufriere Hills in Martinique, Soufriere Hills, wherever the weaknesses are. So that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, so Marilyn, I hope you got the answer to your question, because you were just about to. Yes, you were just asking about the implication for the other volcanoes in the Caribbean. And now Linfield has a question as well. She's speaking about an area between Vacaz and Portsmouth. She says, my last visit there in 2002, I drove up the hillside somewhere between those two areas, and the smell of sulphur was very strong. So is the potent smell of sulphur an indication that a volcano is in the area?
That's an indication that you are living on a volcanic island. Like I said earlier, these are features of volcanic activity. The sulfur springs, the boiling lakes, the mountains. I mean, the mountains, they are features of volcanic activity. And the dormancy is that it has not done anything for a long time. Like I said, in Montserrat, for hundreds of years, they considered it a dormant volcano. And I know our definition for dormancy back in the days was a volcano that's basically dead, but it's not. So it came back to life. These are just features of volcanic activity. They're all caused by volcanism. So it tells you there is hot rocks or something below there causing that stuff that's getting off of the Earth's surface. Over a period of time, if there's enough pressure that builds up and there is a fracture and there's movement, that's what causes the volcanic activity. But in the meantime, you have features that indicate to you that these were formed by volcanoes, and that's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we want to thank everyone for their contribution on the live. And I think Glenda stated it best. My heart goes out to the population of St. Vincent. May God protect them in this troubled time. So thank you everyone who's sharing your concern for St. Vincent. And Adelaide Joseph says, does the constant rainfall in Dominica contribute its volcanoes not being active? Does the rain act as a coolant?
No, I don't think rainfall in Dominica is strong enough to cool 1,000 degrees centigrade. If it has to go up, it will go up, you know. So I don't think it will act as a coolant for that.
Yeah, definitely. And Leslie asks, does oil contribute to the magma and hot molten material coming out of the volcano?
No, no.
Oil from where?
No, oil. That's a different
A different situation.
different class. It's a different situation in geology all by itself. That has to do with I know what they call it, micro fossils that died and decomposed and buried and turned into petroleum later. But that doesn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, now we see evidence that the ash is spreading far and wide. As a matter of fact, I had a friend tell me that one of her relatives said it is gotten all the way to Barbados.
Oh yeah, that's not unusual. One of the things that you pay attention to before the volcano erupts actually is the weather conditions in the area at the time. And what the weather conditions will determine if you have an explosive eruption like what we see, the wind direction helps in moving that ash. If the wind direction was blowing straight north, we would have had ash in Dominica. If it was blowing south, they would have had ash in probably Trinidad and South America. But when I looked at the weather patterns, there seems to be like a westerly wind blowing straight across towards Barbados. So that's what happens when you have the ash is pretty light, so you know it's carried away by the wind. As a matter of fact, if it gets really high up into the atmosphere, 30,000 feet and above, that's actually some of the heights that our jet planes fly. It can get carried around the globe in the upper level air currents that travel around the world. So you know this thing, the jet stream. So you can get ash going around the world in the next 2-3 days coming from St. Vincent.
Absolutely. And then speaking of the ash, we have Louisa Jean-Pierre who says, also there have been some people walking around covered in very heavy ash. Volcano ash is extremely dangerous. It isn't like ordinary ash. When inhaled, it crystallizes in the lungs and is irreversible. So a very important point.
Yes, and that is a very important point, because when people hear ash, their volcanic ash is not like the ash you burn when you burn leaves and trees and all that stuff. It's called ash because of how small it is and some other technicalities. But what comes out of volcanoes is almost like glass. It's in the source of the volcano is mainly silica. And believe it or not, the glass you have on your windscreen, the glass windows you have, it's silica. The glass you drink in your water and your juice from is silica. So the volcanoes, the ash is really, really tiny particles of mostly silica. And when that gets into your lungs, it can be pretty dangerous. So I would advise people to cover their nose and stay indoors as much as possible, and don't go venturing out thinking it's ash from a cigarette or ash from a plant. That's a different ash totally. That volcanic material it's rock. It's fine crystalline material.
Yeah, so Hannah Joseph, I hope that answered your question, because she was asking what forms the ash. So I think we just answered that question. And then we have Elias Dupy on the live, and he says, would this ashfall be good for agriculture in St. Vincent in the medium to long term? Because you remember you talked about how the bottom of the volcano is usually very good agricultural land, which is why people keep moving back to that area in St. Vincent. But Elias has a point. Will the ash convert into good agricultural ground? And maybe like in hundreds of years, maybe?
Yeah, hey Elias, nice to hear you.
Yes, hi Elias, nice to see you.
These are some people I know, but yes, that's one of the reasons why we boast of fertile land in Dominica. And like I said earlier, these natural events, I personally see them as the power of the Almighty. Volcanoes, earthquakes, these are things that form the earth. We can't do anything about it. However, he's right. One of the things we've always talked about, volcanic ash brings up all that nutrients and minerals that eventually creates really fertile land in Dominica and all these other countries. So eventually it helps in the fertility of the soil. So that's a plus, that's an advantage. And as you rightly said, that is probably why people go back to do agriculture in these areas, because in the short to near long term, it provides that nutrients for plant growth. And that's the amazing thing about Earth. That's the most amazing thing about Earth. And people should not look, I think these events become disasters because we human beings are affected, but they are natural events. That's what forms the land. That's what formed the Caribbean. That's what made Dominica the most beautiful mountainous place we boast of. That's what gave us our hot springs, our sulphur springs, our boiling lake we boast of, our beautiful mountains, the trails. That's what created it. I think the big thing there is to understand the power of nature, respect the power of nature, and let it do its thing. Get out of the way, and then you can come back and do what you have to do. When we don't respect that, that's when it becomes a major problem. We don't plan for it, but it does add to the fertility of the soil, and that goes without saying. Dominica has been boasted for years as a fertile land, a fertile agricultural land, and it's mainly because of the volcanic material that we have had that weathered over a period of time and make the available nutrients for our plants and growth. So it's not all necessarily bad. We come from the earth. The earth provides for us. The volcanoes are just a part of what make the earth what it is, and we have to appreciate it from a distance. Be safe, because we can replace everything except for our life.
Absolutely. And I think he's also asking about the ash that got all the way to Barbados. Elias, I don't think there's enough ash getting to Barbados to make their land fertile, if that's what you're asking. So I don't think that the ash that's going all the way to Barbados.
It may have, who knows? It may have, and it's also used. It's also used as building material. We had a conversation earlier, and I think there's a name for it. I can't remember, but one of the guys said in Matnik, there's an area where they extract that ash. It mixes it with cement, and it helps in construction. In Hawaii, there's actually a full-time geologist on one of those old lava flows who's selecting the right volcanic material, magma, for construction, for road construction and other stuff. As a matter of fact, all the dredging you see happening in Dominica and the quarries, these are volcanic materials. It's either the ash or the lava that's been there over a period of time, and it's used for home construction. It's used for road building, and you see all the sand and the stone. That's where it came from. So there is a positive to everything. And once it's Mother Nature, we can't. I mean, like I said before, we just have to respect Mother Nature, let it do its thing, and then there are very smart people out there, very, very intelligent people who will find use for it. I think my perspective is how we look at life. There's some things we can't control, and what are the advantages? What can I get out of the volcanic activity? What can we do? Can we benefit? And I think that's the important question we ask ourselves. And how can we coexist with the forces of nature?
So Elias, you're right that the ash getting all the way to Barbados might actually be beneficial to them.
Maybe.
Now here's a question from Esther. She says, does Dominica's boiling lake help stop our volcanoes from erupting? Any connection between the boiling lake and volcanic activity?
Well, like I said before, all these are features of volcanism. The boiling lake doesn't stop the volcano. The boiling lake actually is in the vent of an old volcano. And the reason why it's boiling is because there's a source of heat that is pretty close to the surface that's causing it to boil. And sometimes it disappears, and they said it disappeared. I'm not 100% sure exactly what the technicalities in how it disappears, if it's evaporation, if it's through a crack or fissure, if it gets down into the vent. But the reason it's a boiling lake is because there's a source of heat which is pretty close to the surface, and if it's up in the mountains, then that means that source of heat is above 3,000 feet high. It's above that source of heat is above sea level, and it's causing that bubbling effect. But it doesn't necessarily. You have to think about it. these forces, we're talking about temperatures in the mantle that's over 1,000 degrees centigrade. What is the temperature of boiling water? 100 degrees. We'd be dead at 100 degrees. And for you to have silica as a liquid or molten in a mantle, it has to be really extreme temperatures. So a little boiling lake, won't stop heat from coming in. I mean, a volcano from exploding if it has to.
Yeah, good answer. Now let's see here. We have Marcus Charles who says, ask Len, what is the effect of the ash on the coral reefs? Is there any connection between the ash and the coral reefs?
I am not sure, because at the end of the day, you remember they said that the ash turns into, when it gets wet, it can turn into rock, because that's what really formed the rock. So it may have some effect on the coral reefs, but I'm not 100% sure. I haven't read up too much on that literature to see what the effects are on there. There may be destruction, because I know coral reef doesn't like all their sediments and all that stuff can affect it, but I don't know. I can say for sure. I'm not sure.
And of course, we have a lot of congratulations and thank yous on the live for you. We have Elsa Proctor who says, what a wealth of knowledge from Lennon. We need more of this program on radio. Well, not on radio, we need them on Facebook. This is why I'm doing them on Facebook. So we can see Lennon, we can share the resources, we can share the pictures, we can share the videos. So I think we've gone beyond radio and we are taking it to the next level. What do you think, Lennon?
Well, like I said in my beginning, I really, really want people to take the positive out of that, because really and truly, we can't do anything about it. But what I really liked and I observed is the thing is, we don't get volcanoes often, but it's going to be part of who we are in the Caribbean. But what I really appreciate out of all this is Dr. Richard Robertson. He's a Caribbean man. He's a black man.
Yes.
And in the world we live in right now, I have seen too many times that we cast aside our own and believe that we don't have the capacity. What I would like to see happen, really and truly, is because the same fascination I had with maps that made me a geologist today, there is a young kid out there who's seeing that stuff and might be interested in geology and not understand. I'll give you a little story. When I wanted to go study geology, the intention was only to serve Dominica, believe it or not. My intention was I would have good use to my country because we are a volcanic island. Life had its way of doing otherwise, and that's purely economics. So I'm in the US right now, and sometimes I'm itching to share that wealth of information. But what I realize is, if we have young kids who are growing up and have dreams and aspirations, and they don't see people like me who have that capability, or they don't see people like Dr. Richard Robertson who have that capacity, then they don't believe in themselves. And that's one of the reasons I accepted your invitation, because I think it's important to have that kind of conversation. So the 10-year-old or the 11-year-old right now might be the volcanologist who, from the information that we've seen right now, becomes an expert. And what I'd like to see, and because of that, I think the Caribbean region, because of where it is, should be the prime area for the study of volcanology. We should actually have a research center, a big-time college department in volcanic research, so we can find out what is the economic use of the ash. We can find out how we can teach the world how to construct and live during volcanic activity. We can teach the world about the different value that geology has to it. Like I said before, when I went, people think geology is about rocks, but we're talking about landslides. We're talking about disaster preparedness. We're talking about our oceans. We're talking about oceanography is one of them. Paleoclimates. We're talking about climates. We're talking about how our coastal region changes over time. That causes human displacement. And the biggest factor in all this disaster is not really the disaster, it's the displacement of human beings. Because if I have to take 20,000 people from St. Vincent, I have to put them somewhere. And all of a sudden, it's disrupting the activity in other islands. So I think coming out of all this, what I hope it does, it inspires and let our leaders understand that not in just geology, But there are so many things that our people, if they are given the opportunity and the chance and the capability, can express themselves. These guys did a marvelous job, and they have to be commended. Hopefully, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent will find it fitting to give them an award, a national award, an OECS award. And these are some of the messages we need to take from these events, knowing where we live, knowing these hazards are going to happen. We had one 26 years ago in Montserrat. We have one today in St. Vincent. We have Mont Pelé still sitting there. We have Volcanoes. Dominica has 9. God forbid it ever happens. We pray it doesn't. But these are the kind of things we have to promote to let people understand that in the Caribbean, we have the capacity, we have people with the intelligence to do these kind of things. And these are the kind of things we have to promote. I think coming out of this, hopefully what I would see is that there's a big research facility with the UE seismic UE, and UE didn't pay me to say that, okay? So I'm doing that free because I think it's the right thing to do. And hopefully the Caribbean can be a region for research and development, and you can develop the next young man from Benz, which is where I'm from, or the next young man from Vekas or some other community, or from Paybush, or from who have that fascination and that dream to do something, you know, in their country and their community.
Yes, and of course, you know, you're thanking the guys from UE, but we also have to give you a lot of credit for stepping to the forefront. I know that you're a very private guy, but you set that aside and you stepped up to the mic to share your expertise. So we have to as well commend you as a Dominican, as a Black man, the same way you were commending the other professor for their efforts. So this is the time where all hands on deck, that we all have to put our resources together and get this information out. And speaking of collaboration, Dave Bertrand asked, have you made contact with the present government to work with them on some of your thoughts, maybe on disaster preparedness and the importance of making sure that we're prepared if unfortunately we are hit by a volcano? Has there been any contact between you and the government?
Well, I'm going to answer this question that way. The responsibility for preparedness in Dominica does not only lie on the hands of the government; it lies on the hands of everybody. So even if I don't talk to the government directly, I talk to people who are involved in the process and share my ideas and thoughts with them, so that they can implement. So I think there is too much dependence on government to do things, and I don't want it to be interpreted anyway, but the responsibility for our safety and the responsibility for our development does not only lie in government. I think we as citizens need to be active. We need to stand up and stop being too passive, and like I said, that's one of the reasons I came here. In the past, I would have probably sat there and don't worry about it and do my own thing, but I think it's important to have that conversation, and sometimes we hide in the shadows because we are afraid we are afraid of the reaction, of the skepticism, or of the criticism. Criticism is good. If I did something that I could improve on, let me know so that the next time I can get better. We have to have that attitude. So I think it's up to the citizens to get informed, to get themselves to that point. So whenever the policymakers, the parliamentarians come there, you tell them what you want. You tell them what your community needs. You're the one voting them, so they make that decision. It's your responsibility to stand up, say, hey, my community is missing a seawall. We need to get it here, and this is what we need to do. If we just sit for government all the time to put policies, we'll never get anything done. We have to stand up as a people to ensure our safety. Like I said, I made a suggestion earlier. We live in a hazardous, we know volcanoes are our hazard. There should be a place in Dominica that's less, and believe it or not, I haven't been in the home for a long time, but I swear to God, I know more that's what's happening in Dominica than most people. Right. I have the volcanic maps for Dominica, and I've had it for a while, and I always follow it. They did these things. Now, if a group of people and the government spend money to do all this survey, to develop a hazard map for Dominica, why on God's earth it's sitting up in somebody's office on a desk not being utilized? So it's up to the people to say, hey, this is the situation we live in. We need to have a place in Dominica that has the lowest risk set aside for future settlement, just in case something like that happens. Leave it there as it is. I'll give you a perfect example of how these things matter. In 2010, I think there was a tsunami in Japan. And one of the bays in that area had been, from time I've been in geography school, I've learned about tsunamis in Japan. Well, there were a couple stones that were along the edges of the hillside, and on the marking of the stone said, do not build below this line. And for 300 years it sat there. What happened is, after that tsunami came through, guess what? That area got inundated with water, and a lot of people died and people were displaced. So what it tells me, 300 years ago, people were wise enough to observe that area had a problem and put a marker there for future generations. That's what you call planning. And I think when you understand, Japan is earthquake and volcano place. I mean, their buildings withstand it because they plan ahead. So I think where Roseau is, considering it's our capital, there should be decentralization of government services. There should be other activities put in Portsmouth. There should be, as a matter of fact, I would not have probably not built a hospital in the Roseau area. The hospital doesn't have to be in Roseau. It could be in an area that's less risky, just in case something happens. Then you don't lose your hospital. But these are things you think about, understanding the hazard you live in. Nobody put a facility that can accommodate people. If something serious, you take them to an area because you planning for the next 100 years. What if that happens? Our hospital is still operational. What if our ministry burned down? We have an office in Portsmouth that's already doing some of the things that's been done in Roseau, so we're not making drastic changes. What if we have to resettle people? We already have a portion of land that's been set aside for the last 100 years, just in case. And then whenever there's future plans, you remember those plans. And I think that's what people have to ask of their representatives. These are the kind of conversations you need to have. If we sit aside, to me, it makes no sense that I go get an education and I spend all this time and I can't apply that education to my current situation or my living standard. That's why we get educated. If you have a particular field, then you have to be able to apply it with everyone around you to better the society, and people shouldn't be afraid to speak up and make suggestions and make observation. I think in having this kind of conversation, that's where ideas, innovation, thought comes out, and then you put the best ideas forward and implement them and for a better society.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. And Leslie Charles had also asked about this particular volcano, but Brian Small says, can the walking volcano in St. Lucia erupt? Do you have any information? There's a walking volcano in St. Lucia?
I don't know. I don't know about a walking. I don't know what a walking volcano is. I have no clue what that is.
That must be a St. Lucia thing, because Leslie also asked the same question. So guys, unfortunately, we don't have information about that particular volcano in St. Lucia.
I think they're asking a similar question that other folks ask. Are the volcanoes linked? Which is what I explained earlier. They're not linked like a pipe. They're not linked like a water system. However, what makes them common is their location on the same plate boundaries. So the same forces that affect that plate boundary are the same forces that affect all the volcanoes in that particular archipelago in the Caribbean. So if it was a uniform movement or uniform, if the forces were equal all over the place, then you would probably have the same reaction. But it's different. It's difficult. St. Lucia, if it's active, it may stay there for 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. We don't know. But what is important is once that activity starts, the people at the UE Seismic Research Center, hopefully in the next 20 years, we get some more young scientists, young volcanologists, young geologists, who through the experiences now can help better predict when these things are going to happen. And that is why it's important. It's not to be afraid, but we have to live with nature. We don't have a choice. But understanding the processes, the depth of the processes, and improving on the science as time goes by. And I think that's what, as a matter of fact, the volcano eruption now gives the scientists an opportunity to do more study, to gain more information, to gain more knowledge about the volcanoes in the Caribbean, and they can do something for. Here's one thing I didn't mention in the past. So if you, I'm going to say about Dominica. So if you drive to Coliho, you see there is one of the mountain sides that's been quarried in and cut down. Now, I have said before, there should be a state geologist or a link with the UE seismic volcanology department Because when you cut down the mountains and you cut the side of a face or you have a quarry in any country in the world, there are geologists out there. And what they do, because the mountains are basically the storybook of your country. The mountains tells a story. So what they would do is, because volcanoes are in cycles, like we've seen in St. Vincent, we had one in the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, two of them, and one right now in the 2020. So what you could do is, during the cut in the volcano, in the mountainside, if you go out there, you can see the different layers of lava and ash. You can see that. I mean, I drive through Dominica. Now that I know what I'm looking for, I can see raised terraces in Dominica. I can see fossils when you're driving along Kulibistri. If you look on that ridge, you can see fossils on the hill. That tells you that part of Dominica had been uplifting. So you also have uplifting happening there. The fossils that are there, they're supposed to be in the water, but what are they doing 300 feet above the water? It tells you there is some uplift. When you look at the cuts through the volcano, through the mountainside, a geologist can go in there and look at the different stratas, and they can do radiometric dating on the stratas and give you an approximate date of when these stratas were laid down. And that will give you an idea. So let's say if the activity had been happening 10 million years, based on that information, you can tell if there was a regular frequency of volcanic activity. And based on that, you can help predict if there is going to be another one within that period of time. So these are some of the things you can implement when you're in Dominica and some other places.
Yeah, all wonderful information. And thank you again so much, Lennon, for taking time out to speak with us. Now, we talked about the ash. Now, Marcus wants to know, can you please advise us about the dangerous gases we should be aware of? And to add to that, how far would these gases extend to other islands, or would it be contained in St. Lucia?
No, in St. Vincent.
St. Vincent, I'm sorry.
I know there is sulfur gases, sulfur dioxide. I think one of the gases are not. The human being only needs oxygen, and we other gases we inhale, like nitrogen and carbon dioxide and so on. These gases are not beneficial to us. They are harmful. Where the gas go depends on the wind. That's why I said earlier, one of the things they look at is the weather conditions around that volcano during the time of eruption, because the wind also helps spread the gases that are not for human consumption to places they don't meet. So if you have residents in Kingston and you have a southerly wind blowing, then guess what's going to happen? You're going to have all that gas coming, into that residential area. So you have the sulfur gases, the sulfur compounds. These are some of the gases and other poisonous gases that come out from the earth. Because it's in an open area, the concentrations are probably not high enough to cause death, but if you have exposure, continued exposure, it can have adverse health effects. If you're in a closed area where the volume of the sulfur gases can be too high, you can get asphyxiation and other stuff like that. But the ash and the poisonous gases coming from the volcanoes, these are not healthy stuff to inhale. I mean, none of that is good stuff for you. So.
Yeah, and I really want to thank everyone who's making such an important contribution to this discussion. Albert says Dominica has 9 volcanoes, numerous sulfur springs, a boiling lake, and the Valley of Desolation. Dominica needs to have an extensive plan should a similar occurrence, and to learn the lessons from what is happening now in St. Vincent and Barbados. So he's sort of reiterating a lot of what we're talking about today. Absolutely.
That's absolutely correct. I think we should not be doing any development plan in Dominica without considering the hazards we live in. Like I said earlier, over the past 10 years, you've seen the increase of volume of vehicles in Roseau. You've seen all that stuff. How is that going to affect people moving out and evacuation? Because the first things people take, and one of the lessons I should mention earlier, I have a friend who lives in St. Vincent. She's a nun down there. We went to school together. She told me in the night it was chaos. I mean, the roads were blocked. So
I saw videos.
So the disaster preparedness people should go to look at the roads in Dominica, look at the amount of vehicles we have, and ask themselves a question: is this road good enough for evacuating the amount of people and vehicles we have? These are simple questions, because guess what? All you need is one roadblock and we got problems.
Mhm.
And you know, Dominica's road, they're not many branches to
Right.
escape. It's one way in, one way out. So these are little things that make a big difference. When you look at the high risk areas, how many evacuation routes we have. When you look at Point Michel, can you evacuate people by land? We can take, for example, look at what happened after Erica, when that little community in not San Sylvester, I can't remember the place, when the
Oh yeah,
landslides,
I forget.
guess what? They had to evacuate people by sea because the roads
Mhm.
were blocked. So these are the things you gotta think of. That's why you have this, so that you can catch the mistakes, see where you need to improve, put the systems in place. And when time change, over 10 years period, a lot can change, and you have to put the systems in place. We should never be building without thinking of the hazards anywhere in any part of the world. I think that's the first thing you do, is you consider the hazards you live around and make sure you plan and prepare for them. That's it. I mean, because the only other option we have, as I said earlier, Dominica is a small country. St. Vincent is even a smaller country. With 100,000 people, there's not much place to go. You can't. I mean, where else you gonna go? And if the whole country is inundated, that means you're gonna have to find a place to put 100,000 people.
Mhm. Wow,
So
incredible.
yeah,
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do. So Tamara Matthew, and I'm assuming she's from St. Lucia, says the
yeah.
volcano in St. Lucia is currently dormant. Therefore, it is a tourist drive-in. Vehicles may drive and park in close proximity, meaning tours are conducted and there are pools available for sulphur baths. So she's just telling us a little bit more about
Yeah.
the drive-in volcano that Leslie and someone else was talking about, Brian was talking about before.
Oh, that's what. Oh, driving.
That's
Oh,
what
okay.
they're
No,
talking about.
that's what they talk. Okay, okay. I get.
Mhm.
I never heard. But here's the deal. Mondstadt was also dormant, and I think it was a big tourism destination too. So you know, like I said, these things happen over sometimes hundreds of years, and we may not see it in our lifetime.
Mhm.
And you know, it's worth enjoying right now. Enjoy it as much as possible. But when that time comes, the big deal is when that time comes.
Prepared. Are you prepared?
Prepared. That's all it is. I mean, it's a hazard. So dormant doesn't mean that will never happen. Dormant just means that there's a period of no serious activity. And if we think of the age of the Earth, and that's one of the things I like to tell people, we're talking about an Earth that is 4.5 billion years. Well, guess what? I'll be here for 1,000,000 years, and the Earth will still be 4.5 billion years old,
Yep.
because that's how long it takes for 4.5 billion
Yeah.
years. So when you put that in perspective, our existence here is minute, and those activities are really minute. It's really tiny events. We're talking about 40 years is nothing, 100 years is nothing compared to the time that the Earth has taken to develop.
Yes.
So
Yeah, and thank you so much, Lennon, for taking our question. So Randy asks, does the geothermal help the volcano to breathe? Just geothermal help the volcano to breathe? Any thoughts on that?
I don't, you know, those things I don't think that matters, because when you think of the scale of a geothermal well, like I said, if you put it in perspective, you're talking about a region or an island that's 700 square miles, and an area that's miles. Putting a geothermal well there is pretty minor. I don't think with the magnitude and the forces and the power you have in there, I don't think that's a major factor in helping volcanoes and all that stuff to breathe. It's we using such a small fraction, a very small fraction of the heat to do anything for geothermal. Because remember, I said in the mantle the temperature goes up to 3,000 degrees centigrade. You're talking about thousands of degrees. Water boils at what, 100 degrees? So you barely touching the source of the heat for a geothermal plant. You're just using that heat to turn water into steam. So that's probably about 100 degrees, 100, 120 degrees, 100 and whatever degrees. So when you think of the scale, it has to be some major event to have any effect on volcanoes and natural phenomena. I don't think man has any ability to affect what a volcano does in terms of their drilling and all that stuff. Though there are superficial features that can be affected, and I think geothermal has its implications. And like I said before, what needs to be done is the research, the development, and to find out what are the hazards associated with geothermal drilling, and considering the risk at which we are, and the risk of the Roseau area and how small the place is. We don't have anywhere to go, and once you weigh this risk, you decide whether it's worth the development over the risk, and that's how you do those things. But I'm not too certain about the science of geothermal causing a volcano to breathe. I don't think that's yeah.
Yes, and we also have Mandela Christian on the live. I believe he was someone who was trying to join us this evening, but we may have to reschedule with him. And he says the UE Seismic Research Center is the Volcano Seismic Center for the English-speaking Eastern Caribbean states. They conduct research for our volcanoes. So a very important resource. So I've included it in a link that I'm sharing on my page, so that, like you said, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves. We cannot leave everything to the government. It is our responsibilities of citizens of those islands, because, like you said before, Mother Nature is going to do what Mother Nature has done for millions of years. So we're the ones who have to ensure that we're protected, and I think the UE Resource Center is a great place to start for some more information.
Yeah, I'll give them kudos to that, because I know growing up in our island, there's a certain culture that things that come from outside of the Caribbean is always better. I will stress again, the UE guys did a great job. And my advice to people is to listen to those guys. They know what they're doing. Dr. Robertson, this guy spent years of their life, that's their life, studying the volcanoes, studying the effects, and it showed in their response to the volcanoes this time. And I think they need to be commended. The entire Caribbean need to commend these guys for the work they have done in the past, through the experience in Montserrat to now to all the other volcanoes we have had. They have learned, and I think they're doing an awesome job. And I think Caribbean people should just look at our education institution. That's an example of what we can do if we put our minds together, and we have capable, competent people who can do those things. So UE is a great resource, man. I don't listen to those folks. They are us. They are our experts that have our best interests, and that's the biggest takeaway I take from this is seeing people from the Caribbean using this equipment, doing this prediction, and doing a damn good job at it, and they need to be commended. And I think that's what people need to take away from that, and understanding that if we put our heads together, we have the capability to do things like that and more.
As we get ready to wrap up, we just want to take a couple more questions before we wrap up. And Vincent Gregoire reminds us that we were referring to Petite Savane when we were talking about the places to evacuate. Thank you, Vincent. We were talking about Petite Savane. Clesso Keys has a question. Is there pyroclastic flow in St. Vincent?
Fire broken. That's what pyroclastic is, fire broken. The pyroclastic material is there closer to the volcano. There probably is that material coming out. I saw it in Montserrat. There was a lot of that coming out. It's really hot gas, hot air, hot gas coming down at great speed. I'm not sure. I look at what the UE research scientists are putting out. I know there's ash, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of pyroclastic material. I bet there is, but I didn't see that information. But I would think that would be part of the eruption.
And Linfield asked, can the disturbances from a volcano cause a tsunami in nearby areas?
Not necessarily. So a couple of people have asked me that question before. So here's the thing about tsunamis. Tsunamis are basically tidal waves, huge waves, and tsunamis are formed normally by underwater, and you have to have a large displacement of water to have a tsunami. So if you have like an underwater volcano that's powerful enough to cause a large displacement of water, it can cause a tsunami. If you have an earthquake that causes displacement in the ocean beds, you can have tsunamis. If you have a huge landslide from a mountainside or hillside, that can cause tsunamis if it slides into the ocean and cause displacement of water. Volcanoes like that they're not normally associated with tsunamis, so that's not something I'd worry about in that situation. But if there is some subsurface activity of some subsurface sub ocean activity or sub ocean earthquakes and so on, I would worry about tsunamis. In that case, it wouldn't be too much of an issue.
Yeah, and of course, as we get ready to wrap up, and I want to thank everyone who joined us on this live. So we'll just take a couple of comments before we go. And we have Albert who says, also what we have learned that the St. Vincent volcano is as much a problem for Barbados as it is for St. Vincent. Yes, the UE Seismic Center did an excellent job. So thank you, Albert. Thank you for that contribution. And then we have Carl Kofi who says, my brother, I've heard you over time on Q95, but bro, I must say you fascinate me with your wealth of knowledge on the current situation of the volcano in St. Vincent, but more so as enlightening us all on the topic. So again, thank you so much, Lennon. And we didn't even get a chance to speak of the COVID-19 protocols that now have to be implemented. And, you know, it seems like it is one disaster piled on top of another disaster.
Well, here's what disaster people will tell you. If you have situations like that, you have to prioritize, which is more urgent. Saving the lives, that is immediate, or trying to, you don't have time to put a lot of protocols in place. So you have to, the people who are managing disaster have to put which is more critical, which is more important, getting the people safely or keeping them back and trying to do the vaccination. So that's something that the disaster response people, I bet, may have gone over, and they would prioritize the incident and figure out what they need to do to get that.
Yeah, and I think it's an island by island basis in terms of what the protocols are once the people are accepted into the island. So each island, I think, has a different protocol.
Yeah, because the first thing in a situation like that is to get the people safe, get the folks to safety, get the evacuated folks to safety. Then that's the number one priority, is to save lives, and then you will deal with the other stuff as you come in. And that's why I said earlier, in there's a lot of stuff that we do on an individual basis in the Caribbean. And I think it's about time with CARICOM and the OECS. We have so many geopolitical organizations. We have CARICOM, we have Windward Islands, we have Leeward Islands, we have the CBI, we have all this stuff. And what is the purpose if we still doing so many things on our own? I mean, if somebody throws a trash in St. Lucia, it might end up in Dominica. If somebody, so we linked. And I think we need to get that ocean barrier away from. I saw a very interesting picture today. Somebody was sitting on the wharf in Roseau and took out a photo of the plume in St. Vincent, and could see that far. And that fascinated me. So it tells me that we are so close. We're the same people, we're probably all related, but you know, we have to come to a point where we have to understand that some of these things need a regional effort. Not an individual.
Absolutely.
Because like the guy mentioned, the ash is a problem in Barbados, and I saw the satellite photograph and I said, oops, Barbados is going to get it. And so that's why we have to have coordinated effort. We have to have regional effort in approaching most of these incidents. And
hopefully someone on this live is connected to all the regional governments and we can start moving in the right direction, because you're correct. We're just tiny islands in the middle of the ocean. So we all have to come together to make a difference. So do you have any final thoughts for us as we get ready to wrap up?
No, I'd just like to say hello to I'm from Benz, and I can't live without shouting out all the wonderful folks in my community, my mom, my sister, and my family on a One Love Charge, the Fabian and Matthew folks. Hopefully they're listening. And all my friends out there, I just want to say hello. Stay strong, and to the people of St. Vincent, I think you guys are in good hands. We can't fight nature. We just have to find a way to coexist and look for the positive in anything in life. There are some things we can't control, and I think everything has an advantage, and I think it's up to us to see what we can gain out of the situation, current as it is, and make things better and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I am so happy we have this forum to be able to share information and to be able to take questions and just kind of share the knowledge, because as Hazel says, I lived on a volcanic island and only today I have knowledge on volcanoes. That's funny.
And I don't know how much more to stress that. I said parting words, but that's one of the reasons I call MAD, because I heard a lot of people giving information and it's out of ignorance, like they just don't know. It's like everything is, if I'm living in a country, I need to know what laws govern me and my existence. If I'm living in a society that is volcanic, I need to know what are my hazards. But it's my responsibility, it's your responsibility to know these things. And I felt it was important to call so that at least using the educational experience I learned so that I can help and bring that information. But one thing that caught my attention with all this information going out there. I mean, all that information right now. I went to study geology 20 years ago. I mean, that time the internet, you can find every information online. The problem is you can't trust the sources, so it makes up a lot of issues. But there is so much information online. There is so much information at our disposal. So you don't necessarily have to go to school to learn a lot of stuff these days, because everything is at your disposal. Is just reading, having that conversation, learning from others, learning from the current experiences, and realizing that we don't exist in isolation. We exist with the energy and the processes around us, and we have to understand it first before we can appreciate it and then learn to live with it. If you don't understand it, if you don't know what exists, then you don't have that appreciation.
Yeah, and just one final comment. Apparently, you've stolen Lindona's atlas. So she said, "I want my atlas back, souple, please."
That's my older sister, by the way.
Oh, your sister. So apparently you own an atlas because a long time ago you stole her atlas. But I want to thank you again, Lennon. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for this very engaging conversation on everything we need to know about the current situation in the Caribbean. And I want to take this final comment from Mandela, because he's an expert in the area as well. There is, hold on, let me stop this because it's rolling up too fast. There is regional coordination of emergency events through the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, regional response mechanisms of CARICOM. The system is synced to the National Disaster Coordination Mechanism. There are frequent meetings for information and knowledge exchange. So that's promising.
Yeah, you see, so here we go. People will not know that if we don't have this conversation, and that is why it's important.
Yes, thank you, Mandela. Thank you so much.
Exactly. So when I ask this question, and these are some of the, when you ask this question, now people know that these things are happening and they appreciate it. And I think sometimes we may be doing a bad job at disseminating information for the people that it's meant to be
impacted.
for. So to impact it. So I think that's a good thing that he mentioned that, and we appreciate it. And I think people should just understand that there are institutions, they are looking out for their interests, and people need to know that.
Yeah, and Mandela and I will coordinate so he can come on a live and share this information as well. So I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank everyone who joined us on this live. Of course, my name is Simone Matthew, and if you would like more information about the work that I do, you can visit pushpast10.com. And of course, we have a link on the events page of how you can support St. Vincent. So all the resources, all the emergency supplies that they need, as well as the contact information in your area of how you can reach out to St. Vincent. And I will continue to update the information, and I will continue to have folks come on and speak with us, because as you know, this is going to be an ongoing situation. So again, thank you so much, Lennon, and you have yourself a wonderful evening.
My pleasure, and you do the same as well. See you guys.
All right, take care. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.